Epperly, a founder and CEO who's ready to rewrite the definition of imposter syndrome. I created Who Made You the Boss to let you know that you're not alone. If you've been wondering whether your burnout is actually a sign toward evolution, or if perhaps there's something more to these challenges we face as leaders, creatives, and entrepreneurs, you're in the right place if you're looking to embrace the challenges you once perceived as negative, if you're ready to own your entire story, and if you're working to level up your business in ways you never thought possible. You'll learn all of this and more by listening in and doing the hard work you know you were meant to do. So let's get started together today on Who Made You the Boss. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Who Made You the Boss. I am very eager to dive into today's episode because we're learning from a leader who I have a great respect and appreciation for. Matthew Upchurch is the CEO of the travel industry's leading luxury network called Virtuoso, and I've been following his leadership tactics since I first entered into my professional career over a decade ago. And so many of our listeners are not in the travel industry, and I can assure you that today's conversation holds something for everyone, regardless of your background. Now, because he's a leader that I've admired for so long, it's really incredible for me to hear this man talk about how he navigates times when he's uncertain, when that doubt creeps in, that this is something we all struggle with. So if you're actively working to take inventory of how our emotions play out in our professional lives, I would encourage you to take a minute to download our workbook on turning imposter syndrome into inspiration. You can find that at lindseyepperly.com/resources. It's so important to pour into our personal and professional development. And that's something I learned early on from Matthew himself. You'll hear today in this episode about how he takes the posture of a lifelong learner, as well as the lessons he's learned about leading through a crisis and how we can all benefit when we believe in the power of human connection. There's a lot of great information in today's conversation. I'm excited for you to hear more from Matthew Upchurch. Matthew, I am so excited to interview you today. Thank you for being on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And, you know, one of the reasons I'm so excited is I knew you when, right?
Yes.
The very, very beginning. And I just have to say that, we happen to be in the travel industry, but as you know well, in our industry and in our ethos and my personal ethos of both Virtuoso and myself, it's all about human connection, which, we started talking about that decades ago. It's really interesting to see the augmentation of that, but to see people like you, come into our industry and not only do well in travel, but do what I think travel does so well, which is bring people together, go deeper, greater understanding. So I couldn't wait to do this because it's so apropos and so wonderful to see.
Yes, the layers that we are going to be able to get into today are really cool. And you're right. I remember exactly when we met because it was my very first travel week. Yeah. And I recall how you connected the dots with what the keynote speaker said that year and what I was getting to do for a living now. And, this guy had gotten on stage that I hadn't heard of at the time, named Simon Sinek, and talked about his why and our why. And then you got up and talked about yours. And I thought, I think Matthew's why might align with what my why is going to be. And so it was so neat to get to know you even that night. And here we are 10, 15 years later. And to know and to see the leadership that you have had and the influence you've had, not just on my life, but on so many of my colleagues and peers' lives. And I know that all of our listeners are going to benefit from learning from you, not just within the travel industry, but well outside of it. So let's just dive in there. I mean, we talk about the defining moments of our lives on this show. It's called Who Made You the Boss, because oftentimes there are those moments where you have to kind of look yourself in the mirror and say, oh God, it's me. I made me the boss. What is this? What's happening when I take control over my own life personally and professionally? What did that journey look like for you? What were your defining moments where you realized I get to be a leader and I get to steward these individuals?
When I look back and I realized, my basic shtick hasn't changed since I ran for class president in the 8th grade. And that was, I will serve you and I will work as hard as I possibly can as long as we're in this together. And when I think about it, the core of that is been at the heart of what I believe. So we've all heard of servant leadership and all that kind of stuff, whatever. And, whether it's, Simon, who's now become, I jokingly call him the godfather of virtuoso. And, he gave such amazing language, to a lot of things that we intuitively know. And I think that's the brilliance of people like Simon or other people like that they don't, it's not that they really invented anything, is that they gave us a construct and they gave us language that makes it easier to absorb, understand, and apply. And so for me, when I love the, who made you the boss, I love the title because it's like, well, really, I never thought of myself as the boss. I felt myself as a custodian. I felt myself as somebody who's responsible. And by the way, you're not a leader because you say you're a leader. You're a leader because people trust you and they
Yeah.
entrust you with
Yeah.
them, and that you're able to communicate and develop something together.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. I named the show Who Made You the Boss because it was a bit tongue in cheek. I feel like that is such an overused word these days. And then it's such an intimidating word oftentimes too, because
Yeah.
you kind of think of that like old stodgy man in a suit, right? And it looks so different to be a leader of anything these days.
Yeah.
And I want to encourage today's leaders to stick in the game when the going gets tough. And that's why we're having conversations like this. You mentioned individuals like Simon who are able to give you the words to process, right, around an experience. And I was listening to a talk that you gave recently, and you had talked a little bit about how the human desire for certainty can amplify our fears and make us question our own strengths. And that line made me think a lot about the very hot topic, a topic we talk a lot on the show about, of imposter syndrome, right? We as individuals desire a certainty in what we're doing, in our output, in our value. And when we don't have it, because you can never truly have it, right? When you don't have it, it makes you start questioning everything. Who made me the boss? What is this that I'm doing? Why am I even doing this? And so I would just love to kind of talk a little bit about that topic alone. Like, how do we combat that desire for certainty and what it does to us when it creates those fears?
Well, first of all, I believe me, I have battled that my whole life, right? As well. I mean, it's kind of and what happens is it kind of sneaks up on you because it kind of goes in phases, right? And you accomplish something, whatever, and then all of a sudden you wake up and like, people are asking, what do we do? And what, et cetera, et cetera. But I think and that really is, I mean, to go back to that, I just want to frame that again, is that our desire, our need and our desire, our human desire for one to have certainty, right, it really is, it does absolutely accentuate and magnify fears. Um, and in fact, and somebody I'm actually considering, I mean, I met for the listeners, somebody that I think has got a really great handle on this is April Reedy. So
Yeah.
she wrote the book Flux.
Yeah.
And she's amazing about, her whole story was that she was at Oxford, I believe, University, about to graduate. She gets a call from her sister that both her parents died in a car crash instantly, and how her whole life changed.
Yeah.
And she talks about all this and how do you deal with a world where the speed of change is overwhelming, right? But I do think that, so it's very helpful a lot of times for me, it's very helpful to have a balancing word. So for me, certainty, I try to balance it with clarity. So it's like, how can, one of the ways that I try to get away from the need for certainty is just to constantly be trying to improve clarity. And that clarity, imbued in the word clarity, is that it's not certain, it's not exact, but if you can keep, it kind of reminds you when you go to the optometrist, does this look better or does that look better? Does this look better? But what does that take? It takes active processing. It takes reading and thinking and discussing and questioning and whatever. I do a lot of professional stuff. I also do a lot of personal stuff, because at the end of the day, if you're a professional, you may be a professional, but as Simon and Brene Brown, a lot of people remind us, we're humans first, professionals second, right? So I do think that having some sort of an active practice, and I think that's another really important word in life and in business and in everything, is that, is having some sort of a practice that you improve on, that you build on. Recently, I read a lot of different things, both professionally and whatever you want to call it, spiritual or life, life coaching or whatever you have. And it was very interesting because I've been reading a lot of these different authors, and this young man, well, Carlos Greta, who I mentored and became very good. I like you, he was one of those people that I met really early on. I said, you watch this person, right? You just watch this person. And I had given him a recommendation of some things to read during the pandemic. And then he told me about somebody else. And I read this author, and it was just blew me away. And then when we met in Montreal, he said, yeah, don't you see this particular author? Don't you think he's a whole nother level? And I said, I intuitively thought you were going to ask me that question. And I might surprise you to say, I don't think so. Really? Why? He said, and I said, you know why? Because actually, what I actually think that process is almost like a game of Tetris. Like you read different things, and it's all these pieces of the puzzle. And then all of a sudden, for you and I, it could be completely different, right? Different sequence, different whatever. But all of a sudden, you read somebody new, they're really saying a lot of the same things, but for some reason, that person's language, that framing, that whatever is not only makes sense by itself, but it all of a sudden, like, it's the whole puzzle, right? And so,
Yeah.
how Tetris, you put in the right piece and
Mm-hmm.
boom,
Mm-hmm.
all that stress, all that stuff goes down.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what came to me. So
That all makes a lot of sense, that it's a very personal experience, your practice that you're talking about. And I think it was April that you were quoting in the speech that I
yeah,
heard you talking,
yeah,
where one of the things that we can do is, instead of being certain of one future, it's being open to the possibilities of multiple futures. I'm curious to go back to your word practice, to kind of hear a
yeah.
little bit more, like, what is Matthew Upchurch's practice? Are you meditating? Is it reading? Like, what does that look like for
Yeah.
you?
Well, I do. First of all, one thing that I've always been a huge believer in, and I don't actually understand. I mean, look, maybe it's financial, maybe it's this, maybe it's whatever, but I've always been a believer in building up resources. And as I got older and had more means, I started, I've had executive coaches, life coaches, storytelling coaches. I've never understood why more people don't. And there's wonderful means today, right, where you can do this. But so I've always believed in trying to have people in my life that I could rely on, that could be sounding boards, that can teach me something. So part of my practice has always been trying to make sure that I have those types of people or resources in my life. Reading is, I'm not a really, I mean, it's funny. I read a lot. I was,
Yeah.
to be totally vulnerable and real, I was not a good academic.
Yeah.
My kids are so much better I mean, like they're off the charts better than I was. I was a bit ADD and a little bit like, so just, but I love that. I love that old adage about don't confuse your learning with your education, or something like that. One of the two,
Mm.
right? So it's like
Mhm, mhm.
learning something that you need to learn to love. So
Yeah.
I read a lot of pieces. I very rarely read an entire book, right? Because
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
got, but I read a lot of excerpts. I read a lot of stuff. And I just think that practice. Now, one of the things that I think is very real, and at least it's been to me, is I have this theory that the more you open yourself up to love, or the more you open yourself up to creativity, it's a duality issue. So to the greater extent that I can open up my mind to creativity is also to the degree that I could be a absolute master catastrophizer,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
the ability of my mind to just invent the most ridiculous
Mhm.
catastrophes, right? Or what's going to go wrong. It's just, and I've literally have come to realize that it's the price you pay. So
Mm.
the more open-minded, the
Agreed.
more you are on the positive side, it's like you can't, it automatically,
Everything
it
demands
pushes
balance.
both
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being a catastrophizer, I think that we have had our fair share of catastrophe in this industry over the years and years and years. And we talk on the show a lot about this concept of the monsters that save us, right? So it's this idea that our greatest obstacles, our greatest fears that manifest as reality, when you're in the middle of those seasons of life, I mean, you feel like you're swallowed by a whale, right? Like you are in the belly of the beast and you think, this is going to destroy me. And ultimately, it's those seasons that actually refine us and ultimately make us who we are supposed to be and how we're supposed to show up. And most of the time, they're not even the catastrophes we imagined in our head anyway, right? Like they are totally what fresh new hell awaits us today. But I would love to talk because you led not just your company and not just your network, but really an industry through its greatest crisis, right? Like the travel and hospitality industry during the pandemic had never seen darker days. And you were responsible for showing up and communicating and leading individuals who just, I mean, were beside themselves with despair, with grief, with negativity, with what is next. What was that like and what did you learn?
Well, I mean, part of it was also, it was when we talk about practice, it's like I felt I need, because I had that both conscious and unconscious knowledge. To me, it was also very, it was, survival of myself as well. So for me, it's like, well, what can I do? What can I do? And to be vulnerable and open, and I mean, when I did when I started my weekly video messages that went out. And by the way, I have to say that it's blown me away how many people have mentioned those in the
Yeah.
last couple of years as I travel the world, and very moving. But I also want to be very real and say it was also that became one of my practices to try to get out of my own head, to
Yeah.
try to realize that to not allow my negativity or my fear to just take over. So I would get up at roughly somewhere around 4 in the morning because I knew that the world was changing so fast that there was no point in writing or doing anything the day before, because who the heck,
Yeah.
so I literally, from the time I kind of synthesized everything I was trying to deal with, and what I was trying to do was contextualize, right? I wasn't a news reader. People could read what they could read statistics and all that. All I was trying to do was provide some context, and a bit of it. And the context was also a little bit of like, here's our reality, but look where we came from. Look at the things that were there. Look what's possible in the future, and just trying to maintain a thread. It's almost like it's almost like that movie where the kids were rescued from that cave in Thailand, right?
Yeah.
And they were
I haven't seen it.
underwater and whatever, and they had
Yeah.
this like safety line, right? And it
Yeah.
was like that's but I was doing it for myself as much as
Mm.
our community, right?
Yeah.
So that, to me, that was part of it. That was the ability to engage both my intellect, but also the regulation of my own feelings. Trying to
Yeah.
be uh, not Mr. Positive,
Right.
but where, how could I best describe at any given moment, what I was feeling in a way that was hopeful, but not Pollyanna.
Absolutely. It's so interesting to hear. I haven't actually processed this part of it for me either, in that stepping into that leadership for you is also what you needed. That stepping into your calling and who you're supposed to be to kind of steward the direction of that group of people is ultimately something that gave you hope and clarity and the ability to move forward. That's really,
Yeah,
really meaningful.
absolutely. And a very practical, a very practical, framework, right?
Yeah.
So, I always joke about myself that I'm like the dog in the movie Up, right? Where it's like squirrel, squirrel,
Yeah.
squirrel, right? So I'm easily distracted, and and because I just, I love possibility and I love all this stuff, whatever. But I'm also a big believer and I've really become a big believer in frameworks for a lot of things. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes or misconceptions that people have is that frameworks limit your creativity. I actually think they do the opposite.
Hmm.
And by the way, there are lots of wonderful frameworks out there. For example, we at Virtuoso, we use Patrick Lencioni's The
Yeah.
Advantage.
Yeah.
We use the playbook, we use the language, defining objectives, the 6 critical questions, all that. And I remember when we first implemented, I said, look, the reality is that there'll be no framework that's perfect. And in fact, but what you need to do is you need to commit to it, right? Because if you pick a framework and then you abandon it when you don't agree with it or it gets hard, well then you're because you're going to move on to the next one and you're going to run into the same thing. So, but I love frameworks from the perspective of I think they make you more creative.
Hmm.
I think they build common language for yourself. They anchor you, so I can go on little expeditions, of thought and whatever, blah blah blah, but come back to a framework, and a framework that's both good for me personally, so that I don't feel lost, but also a framework that allows me to have a common language and processes and things like that with my team members and my colleagues and the
Yeah.
people that I work with.
I want listeners to kind of understand the volume at which you speak to, right? We are not just talking about your team at Virtuoso, but when you address a crowd, when you address those who follow you, it is agencies and advisors and suppliers. It is the worldwide travel network. Like, at what point, how big is Virtuoso these days? How many individuals essentially tune in and
Oh
follow
gosh,
along what you're
I
doing?
actually hadn't even done the math because I don't even have the number on all the partners and all that. But if you think
Yeah,
about it, at Virtuoso Travel Week, we have 5,000 people. We have
right.
nearly
That's
about
just a
20,000
fraction.
advisors, and we
Yes.
have people all over the world. So yeah, but what's interesting is that it's I don't know. I mean, one of the things I will say that you're giving me the opportunity to say though, it's interesting because as it's grown over the years, sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, I miss it when it was so much smaller and this and that, and the other, whatever."
Mm.
And when I want to sometimes just yell out, "You don't think I miss it?" Because like, for example, people think because of what I do, a lot of people have the
Yeah.
misconception that I'm a great networker.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you give me I tend to be a horrible networker because if I'm at a cocktail party, I don't like superficial conversations, right?
Yeah.
So I tend to find a couple of people, whatever, and I get into this like in-depth whatever, and then I look at my watch. It's like 20 minutes later, and the cocktail party is only 45 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you
Stuff like
think
that.
this is? The moment that other people get to form an opinion about your business that you are like, oh, well, I get it. This is my baby. And I also have an opinion about my business. People forget that
Right. Right.
the leaders of that company actually also feel some certain way.
I've become very good friends with Simon, and sometimes I know him well enough. I said, sometimes I can't stand you. Why? What did I do? He goes, because you write a book like Start With Why or Leaders Eat Last or The Infinite Game or whatever, and you get to you get on stage and you get to basically do the relatively same subject matter 560 times.
Yeah.
Well, hell yeah. I mean, I'm not taking away that you're fabulous. I said, you know what freaks me out? I have to face the most accomplished, amazing people in my industry 2 and 3 times a year and try to tell them something different.
Yes. That has to be such fun. You know what's interesting too? I was even thinking because you got a really cool opportunity where you interviewed Stephen Bartlett, had him come
Yeah.
out to Vegas for Travel Week. I'm so sad I missed it this year. And he talked about how like a community owner's job, right? What is a community owner's job? It is to facilitate the bonds where we can add value to each other.
Right.
And I thought about you and your position, especially because when you think about the number of stakeholders involved in your business processes and goings on, oftentimes at odds with what another
Well,
wants, right? Like everyone wins in a different way. So like, how do you even begin to, and of course you can't make everyone happy, but how do you make decisions around that when you have stakeholders with competing interests in such a way?
what we're doing now with the speed of change and everything that's going on, really the core of where we're trying to evolve would be caught within the concept of how do you grow bigger and smaller at the same time.
Hmm. How do you?
And that's, well, part of it is what we're a lot of. See, I'm a big believer that the vast majority of innovation is not invention. The very few things are really truly new inventions. I think a lot of innovation is the ability to observe naturally occurring phenomena, behaviors, opportunities, um, and then resequence them,
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
rename them,
Mm-hmm.
add new capabilities that weren't there before. So the vision that I have is, and that we have as an organization is, how do we develop an ecosystem that allows the naturally occurring communities that are there anyway? But
Mm.
how do you develop an infrastructure, almost like an operating system, that allows those communities to operate at a higher level than they would have without the operating system, but
Mm-hmm.
then benefit each other through the ecosystem?
Yeah. You know, changing gears a little bit, I want to talk about something that I've seen you do really well because my husband, Jeremy, and I have really had the privilege of getting to know you and your wife, Jessica. And it's a really cool thing to see the inside glimpse of the way you two support each other personally and professionally. And I would love to learn a little bit about the mindset from partner to partner, right? What this looks like when it comes to you've built this incredible company and your wife has this fire in her bones toward a mission, right? She is all in for sustainability. Jessica Upchurch is phenomenally known for this. And you're able to bring these two passions together and support one another. I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be a great partner, personally and professionally, and how you go about supporting a very strong, independent female like your wife.
Well, first of all, it's so funny. I have a picture here of Jessica with a little heart, and it says, "I love you because I always believe in you." And
Mm,
so I think one of the most incredible things when you're blessed, look, and like any other couple, you have those moments of insecurity, right? And one of the best concepts I've ever heard, and when it comes to human relationships, is Eckhart Tolle. And he uses the word that every human being there's two parts to us. There's our normal who we are, our soul, whatever you want to call it, and our pain body.
yeah, yeah, I've heard his work.
And when
Yeah.
you have and so you got it. If you can get some sort of, is that really me talking, or is that my pain body? Is that my fears, my
Mm-hmm.
insecurities,
Mm-hmm.
my whatever? And if you're blessed to be able to have a partner that is willing to stay on that path, right? And also to maintain the whole idea that there's the two partners, and then there's this third thing, the vessel, right? Whether it's a marriage or a partnership or whatever it may be, right? And kind of understanding that you're both putting things in there, but you're not that vessel, right? You're two independent entities. And this is some work that I did with a life coach that gave me that visual. But I think that's one of the things um, that's been one of the things that when you can get past your insecurities and past your pain body and past all this stuff, whatever, and be able to break it down. And sometimes it's just, sometimes you have to back off too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's interval training. Anything where you put the gas down and you never lift it up is going to blow up.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing about when do you back off, when do you learn, in sports you would call it interval training, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are the things. But I do think that one of the magical things is that if you have two individuals that at their core are continuous learners, they want to keep evolving, they want to keep growing. I mean, that's a and then it just takes time. I mean, we would be sitting here and tell you that it would be like any relationship, you know, the beginning is hard, right? And then you get to know each other and you go through all those things. But I also think And then when you start seeing, I'm a big believer, even before a partnership or a marriage, whatever, but for some reason at a very young age, I always kind of had this intuitive notion that the best way to get things done was to partner up with other people
Yeah.
that had complementary skills.
Yeah.
Um, and
That's evidence in your surrounding yourself with coaches and with others
yeah,
who level you up.
yeah.
And
And
that's
it's
what
just,
you and Jessica do for one another.
yeah, yeah,
It's a very beautiful example. You
yeah.
two.
And it's been, and also and then also it's just the ability to have fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to
Mm-hmm.
hold up a beer and, the number of times that we've had an intense exchange and then we literally end up like laughing so hard that we like, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah.
It's like, what were we? I mean, it's like, this is just ridiculous. So, and yeah, and I think, um, it, and it's both the diverse, it's like a Venn diagram, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it also helps to have, those things that bind you together that you, whatever, but then the ability to also have the interest or the skills or the whatever
Mm-hmm.
that make you different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you guys set a beautiful example for others of us who are looking to support our partners and what their dreams are, whether you work together or not.
Yeah.
You guys just do that really, really well. Um, before we go, I feel remiss if we don't talk about travel for just a second. This is what we do for a living. But
Yeah.
one of the things that you've said over the years, and I found myself using it very, very frequently, is the idea that, we're not just planning people's vacations and their cute little holidays when you work with a travel advisor. You're working with someone who is stewarding the most precious asset. It is
Right.
their free leisure time.
Right.
And I would love to hear an example of where someone did that for you and where that free leisure time, you saw an immediate return on an experience that you and your family had while you were traveling.
Well, well, for me, I have, I love traveling the world. I mean, it's like whether I go to somewhere like London, where I've literally been going there since I was, 7 years old and been there, I don't know how many times, but then seeing it with, my daughters or my sons, and then even at different ages. I mean, that's what's so wild. So one of the things I've always loved about travel is that you could have gone back somewhere over and over again, but when you're with friends, when you're with family, whatever, it's just that you kind of re-experience it, right? But there literally is science. Like when the human brain, the human brain is always trying to conserve energy. When it has too much information coming at it thinks in patterns. I don't know if you ever seen that series on Nat Geo TV, something about your mind or changing your mind or something like that. But basically, it does a lot of it tries to save energy by looking at patterns,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that the mind does is that in the when it's trying to deal with too much information, it also prioritizes in your amygdala that which is a threat,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
why in the news, if it leads, it bleeds and whatever, because that's
Yeah.
why it happens. But when you travel, it literally does open your mind
Hmm.
because now all of a sudden your brain is not different smells, different this. It's not so you have less patterns to rely on. And so for me, my ability to connect when Brene Brown spoke at Virtuoso Travel Week, people ask me like, well, why would you bring a PhD in social work research to come talk to a bunch of travel people? Well, that was whatever. And I said, because you know what? We may say that we're in the travel business, but we're really in the human connection business. And that's what that was about. How do we connect better? So, there's been a lot written about that. The number one thing that makes people suffer is when they feel separate from,
Yeah. The loneliness
right?
epidemic. Yeah.
Right. And so for me, travel is this thing that it's food for the soul. It helps people connect. The old adage about it's a lot harder to hate people up close.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
all the different things that here there. I mean, sometimes when I talk about this stuff, I feel like I'm like, I just want world peace, what I mean, but I do, but it sounds a little pitchy, but
Right.
the reality is I am incredibly blessed to have been grown up in this industry, to have a father who's a leader in this industry. And by the way, to have even seen my own children, like I would say officially right now on your podcast, I want to thank the Virtuoso community for also helping raise my own children because they have. I
Yeah.
mean, I have children that have literally been to Virtuoso Travel Week, seen all this stuff, and they've seen the glitzy part of it, and they've seen the
Hmm.
back of house part of it, right?
Hmm.
But travel and this community has changed who they are as people.
Yeah.
And so for me, when it comes to the travelers that we serve, it's not about booking a trip. It's all that. It's why the value of travel advisors has, back to that thing about nothing's ever really truly new. It just the people that are real, true, trusted advisors, they're the ones that are basically helping people add that sense of experiences and connection and things
Hmm.
that makes the rest of their lives so much richer.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it in terms of what is at stake here, when you joke about it, sounds like world peace. It actually is real, though. What's at
Yeah,
stake is that when we forget what it means to connect as humans
right,
and to honor one another's cultures and to go and be visitors and to be kind, gracious travel citizens, like that
right.
is really important work. And so it has changed my life. I know because I've been in this industry in and out, but it's really meaningful that we all have the ability to make that impact well beyond, the front doors of a travel agency, that the clients get to feel it and that that you're a small part of their experience as a human on this planet, learning and growing and opening their minds. So thank you for building what you have built because it really has impacted millions globally. And thank you for your time today. This has been a really meaningful conversation. It's been so fun for me to get to know you on this level.
Well, thank you so much. And as I said at the beginning, congratulations on your success and your inspiration of so many people. And I just love you. You are an example of literally what we just ended with, right? That we are taking the blessings that we have from our ability to make a living and be part of this industry, but to actually make sure that it impacts those even
Mm.
outside our industry.
Yeah.
I feel it as it's both a blessing and a responsibility.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you so much for stewarding that so well for so many. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.
If you've gained some valuable insights from listening to Who Made You the Boss, there are two ways we ask our listeners to show us some love. First, share this episode with a friend who you know would benefit. The more we impact others, the more we can grow our resources to impact you. It's a win-win and it helps us a ton. Second, if you'll take a moment to leave Who Made You the Boss a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, that helps us continue to create meaningful work and it just makes our day. Thank you, listeners, for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and keep being the boss of your own incredible story.